Hey, thank you so much. Welcome to another episode of the Love Hope Lyme podcast. My name is Fred Diamond. I'm the author of Love Hope Lyme, with family members, partners, and friends who love a chronic Lyme survivor need to know, and also the host of the Love Hope Lyme podcast. If you're watching this on YouTube, thank you so much. Be sure to subscribe, give us a thumbs up, leave a comment. Laura, the first show that we did, we got like dozens of comments and people were asking great questions. Keep doing that. We would greatly appreciate that. If you're listening to the show on Apple Podcasts, thank you so much as well. Please feel free to give us a 5-star review. We would greatly appreciate it. The show was created for two audiences: those who love a chronic Lyme survivor, family and friends, and partners who want to know more about what their loved one is going through. And Laura and Tim, the bigger audience has become chronic Lyme survivors who are looking for more support and want to figure out some strategies and ideas and ways to get the message across to those people about what they need. And as we know, it's a challenging community. It's a challenging disease. It's a hard disease, and we're excited to have you back on the show. So today's show, every quarter, I'm very excited that we do a special episode with Laura MacNeill, the CEO of the Global Lyme Alliance. And today, we've done 2 shows already, Laura, just me and you.
Yeah.
People can find them on YouTube or Apple Podcasts. And I'm excited today. We also have Tim Sellati, who is the Chief Scientific Officer for Global Lyme Alliance. So I'm excited to see how you both bounce off each other and how we get some more information here. I also want to remind people too that the book Love Hope Lyme has always been, the PDF, the e-version of the book has always been free for chronic Lyme survivors. You can reach out to me on Facebook or LinkedIn. I spent a lot of time on LinkedIn. I'd be happy to send you a PDF. Laura and Tim, we've sent out over 1,500 PDFs of the book. And if you want to purchase it, of course, it's up on Amazon. And if you want signed copies, I've had people who've bought a dozen copies to distribute to family and friends. Reach out to me on Facebook or LinkedIn, and we'd be happy to get that to you across. All right, like I said, Global Lyme Alliance. We bring Laura MacNeill on every quarter. We've had some great shows. The last show we did was on co-infections. And the first show that we had done, we talked about mental challenges that Global Lyme Alliance is working on, improved diagnostics, improved testing, and improved treatment. And the shows have been just so well received. I'm a big believer in what GLA is doing, and I'm excited to get deeper. I know you all had just developing your 3-year research strategic plan. So we're going to get deep into that. So why don't you both introduce yourself for people who don't know you? Laura, again, you've been on the show twice already, and we're doing the show every quarter. Give us a little bit of introduction into you and what you're doing at Global Lyme Alliance.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for having us on again. I'm Laura MacNeill. I'm the CEO at Global Lyme Alliance, or as we affectionately call it, GLA. And our mission at GLA is really to cure Lyme disease. And that's a very complicated problem. It's a massive undertaking, an infectious disease that's a vector-borne disease. And so we were born a 501c3 to start raising money to fund research and help patients that are sick today. And that's what we're focusing on.
All right. And the mission is so incredible. Tim, this is your first time on the Love Hope Lyme podcast. I'm thrilled to have you here with Laura. Why don't you give us an introduction as well?
Thank you very much for having me as well. My name is Dr. Tim Sellati. I'm a PhD research scientist by training. I've been with Global Lyme Alliance as their Chief Scientific Officer for 7 years now. And my background is in studying Lyme disease and other tick-borne diseases as an academic research scientist. And my role here at Global Lyme Alliance is to help develop the research program, essentially identifying the research scientists and the cutting edge discoveries that are most likely going to positively impact patients' lives, and soliciting grant proposals from these researchers from around the world, and very rigorously critiquing those proposals so that we ensure that the generous donations made to Global Lyme Alliance are being spent on the best science and getting the biggest bang for the scientific buck for helping patients.
All right, I know we're going to be talking a little more about that as we get into today's podcast, but I'd like you to give us, you both can contribute to this. Maybe Laura, you could go first. Let's get kind of a state of the union for Lyme disease. What is the current state? Again, we're doing today's interview in August of 2024, the summer of 2024. The show is going to be posting or has posted in September if you're listening in the future. What's the current state of Lyme disease globally? I like to say, truthfully, it's a global epidemic.
It is.
The very first organization that reviewed my book, Love, Hope, Lyme, in the summer of 2022 was the Lyme Disease Association of Australia.
Yep.
And I get people matter of fact, today, Laura, you and I have talked about this. I get 5 to 10 people a day who reach out to me just looking to connect because of the book and the podcast. Today, I've already had 2 connections from the UK, from England. What are the biggest challenges facing the global Lyme survivor community?
Yeah, so the state of Lyme disease today, and Lyme and other, right? Lyme and co-infections, is that the disease is rapidly increasing in its prevalence and spreading in ways that we just haven't seen before. You can talk about global warming. You can look at domestic and international travel. And these ticks just need to hitch a ride to a new area of the country. And all of a sudden you have a disease that's showing up in a patient population that hasn't been exposed to that before. So we are seeing that there are more and more cases. The overall surveillance rates are going up every year. The estimation is about 500,000 new cases a year, but everybody knows that is way short of the actual number. And I think since I've arrived in this community a little over 2 years ago, I've really come to the conclusion that there are a lot of misdiagnosed people out there that are maybe under the wrong disease umbrella, that it really belongs to Lyme disease. And Lyme disease scientific community calls it the great mimic. Lyme disease can look like a lot of other things. And when it's not top of mind, it's not the first thought because you don't live in an endemic area, or you don't know anyone who's ever had it before, and your doctor certainly isn't thinking about it. You could look like a lot of other things before, wow, this treatment isn't working, I'm not getting better. And maybe months down the road, you find out that it is Lyme disease. And so the cases that we know today, are just way shy of the reality. And we do know that the problem is increasing. Ticks prevalence is increasing. They're staying awake longer throughout the year. We're not getting the deep freeze in the Northeast that we're used to. And so we have an increasing problem on our hands. And GLA is here to be able to solve that problem and to keep chipping away at better diagnostics, an FDA approved treatment that won't take out every bacteria in your body. It's going to leave the good bacteria. It's going to get just this bacteria. And continuing to work with the top researchers and scientists across the world, encouraging them into this space, encouraging funding to follow it so that we can get ahead of this problem. And really what we need today, and we don't have, is that direct diagnostic. And we continue to just shout from the rooftop that we absolutely need that. And I'm going to let Tim comment as to why that direct diagnostic is just so important for research.
Yeah. The one other thing I would add in terms of sort of a state of the union, Laura had mentioned the Northeast. For better or worse, the United States benefits from the fact that Lyme disease was originally described in Lyme, Connecticut. And so Lyme disease as an infectious disease, as a vector-borne disease, is more well-known, better understood, believe it or not, better accepted here in the US than it is in Europe, in the Scandinavian countries, in China. And so one of the problems that Lyme patients, particularly chronic Lyme patients, face outside of the United States is that the disease is not really well understood. And that puts patients at a disadvantage because if the physician doesn't understand the disease or believe the disease actually exists in their country, they're really not properly positioned to help those patients.
Yeah, before we talk about the 3-year research strategic plan, Laura had just alluded, Tim, to the fact that we're still struggling in 2024 with comprehensive diagnostics. And I hear that so many times from people who, we hear, if you can give us some clarity on where we are with diagnostics today. And I know we're probably going to be talking about that as part of the strategic plan, but where are we today with diagnostics?
Well, I can touch on that subject because that is, I would say, the most important
Okay.
of the four pillars of the research strategic plan is diagnostics. And the challenge is that right now, the vast majority of diagnostic testing relies on your body developing an antibody response to the Lyme bacteria. And for a number of different reasons, some people may develop an antibody response, some people may not. Some may develop an antibody response and that will last for a period of time and then they'll stop producing antibodies. Or they will continue to produce antibodies for a much longer period of time than we currently think is normal for bacterial infections. And because the diagnostic test, an indirect diagnostic test, is looking for those antibodies, it can take several weeks for those antibodies to be produced. And so if you go looking for the antibodies before your body has actually made them, you're going to have a negative test result, which doesn't mean you don't have Lyme disease. You just looked too early
Mm.
for the indirect evidence for it. So Laura mentioned direct diagnostic testing. We need to look for the Lyme bacteria itself, either the proteins or the DNA or the RNA or other molecules that make up the Lyme bacteria, and use that as a basis for early detection, earlier detection of Lyme disease than we can achieve looking for antibodies.
So we started talking about the diagnostic, the 3-year research strategic plan. You
Mhm.
mentioned 4 pillars. You just mentioned the first pillar is improved diagnostics. Why don't you take us through the other 3 pillars? And I would also like to talk about maybe some of the currently funded research projects that fit into the strategic plan and how they help patients. So, I'll let you take both of those together if you want to go
Sure.
through the 4 pillars first, and then we'll talk about some of the direct evidence of what's being done.
Yes. So what I want to do is take a step back because I actually talked about the second pillar. The second pillar is the diagnostics. It's arguably the most important from the perspective of patients and doctors being able to correctly diagnose patients. But to get to that pillar of diagnostic testing and how do we fund research in that area, GLA also puts a lot of emphasis, supports a lot of basic research about Lyme disease. How does the bacteria get from the tick to the human? What is the consequence of the bacteria moving from the tick to the human? Why do some people develop very severe Lyme disease and others don't? Why do some develop arthritis or carditis, inflammation of the heart, or neurological complications? Why do some people respond favorably to antibiotics where others do not? This is where the basic research comes into play to understand how this bacterial invader engages our immune system. What are the pieces, parts of the bacteria that cause disease in an individual? Those are the same pieces, parts of the bacteria that we would love to try and detect as early as possible in the blood, in the urine, cerebral spinal fluid from the brain, synovial fluid from the joints, because across the board, everybody appreciates the sooner you can accurately diagnose Lyme disease and treat the patient that has Lyme disease, the better the prognosis for recovery and the less likely they're going to develop chronic Lyme disease.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about this, but whenever a lot of people know, obviously, that I wrote the book, and a lot of my friends are following, and people that I know, whenever there's a article written anywhere about something being researched at some university, people always forward it to me. I'm kind of curious, where do you think back to a sort of like a state of the union question, where are we with research at universities? Is it kind of like still like a tiny niche, or is it bigger than we might be thinking? How has the university or in that research world been moving towards researching Lyme?
That's an excellent question. It's in academic research institutions, at research hospitals. It's bigger than you may think, but not big enough.
Right.
Because the challenges associated with diagnosis and treatment, particularly of chronic Lyme disease, is much, much larger than the group of researchers and industry and government that are dedicating themselves to, as Laura alluded earlier, curing Lyme disease. But Global Lyme Alliance and other organizations are funding some of the best and brightest researchers at Columbia University, Tufts University, Stanford University, Johns Hopkins University, Harvard Medical School, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. One hat that I wear beyond being the chief scientific officer is I play scientific Cupid. So I literally connect researchers and physicians and patients across the spectrum to try and get just the right group of individuals together with diverse skill sets, diverse tools, diverse perspectives on how to solve problems, because that's what's necessary to solve such a complex problem. And that's where GLA really comes into its own, really comes into its leadership position, because we've got this strategic plan. We're focused on basic research, we're focused on diagnostics, and when we can make true significant advances in those areas, as we have been over the past several years, now we're in a position where we start to explore treatment options. And what drove the development of the research strategic plan was asking the patients, what do you need? We're listening to the patient's voice. And every single person that we spoke to said, you need to drive discovery of effective treatments for chronic Lyme patients. And so that is the overarching goal of our 3-year research strategic plan. It's not like we came up with the plan last Friday and we started implementing it on Monday. It's going to take time, but basic research, innovative diagnostics, funding innovative treatment options, and then being able to take those treatment options into a clinical studies venue where we can start to enroll patients that are chronically infected with Lyme disease or other tick-borne diseases and figure out, yeah, this treatment works in a mouse, but we're not in the business of curing mice. We're in the business of curing patients. So are we there yet?
Yeah, that's so just to make sure I'm clear. The 4 pillars: basic research on the disease, tick activity, et cetera, diagnostics, treatment options, and then
Clinical studies.
clinical studies.
Exactly. And
Good.
and clinical trials, as Laura had mentioned. We funded Kim Lewis's research at Northeastern University, discovered a highly effective antibiotic that very specifically kills the Lyme bacteria and not other bacteria in your body, other good bacteria in your gut microbiome. This is the first new antibiotic treatment for Lyme disease in 4 decades. And
Yeah.
it's going through phase 1 clinical trials right now in Australia. And come next year, they should initiate phase 2 clinical trials here in the United States.
Tim, I'm
So
going to ask you a question. Oh, I'm sorry, Laura.
let
Go
me
ahead,
just
Laura.
tie that together for
Yeah.
listeners, because, even with that very exciting project, which I've mentioned before, they run into a challenge that all of prospective biotech and researchers run into when they're going to host a human clinical trial here, is if you don't have that direct diagnostic test to be able to know for sure someone who's had maybe a long-term reaction, long-term antibody reaction to the infection, or they have an acute new case. You can't discern what's really happening. It's very, very challenging to host a clinical trial that will get FDA approval, because you have to be able to say, I definitively I know that everybody who got this treatment had an acute Lyme case. And that's not easy to do. So that group is actually only taking in patients that have a bullseye rash. It's the only way to really know. And that's all you need to know about the current diagnostic test, is that we have to go to the visual of the rash to really, really know. And so, Tim gave me a great example before about how to really view all of this. Like if someone presents in the ER with flu-like symptoms and you don't know if it's COVID, influenza, or RSV because there's no test that really tells you the difference, you might have the right treatment for the right disease, but you can't really test and know that if 1/3 is the wrong infection, right? So that's why the diagnostic test is just so critically important, because it'll open up the possibility and the avenue for all the wonderful research projects that really need that to start proving their concepts.
Yeah, I have a question about that. And people might be wondering, does most of the research that you're doing fund universities and those types of research facilities? There's also commercial entities, of course, who are looking to create things. How does that play with what y'all do?
Yeah. So our grants typically go to researchers, institutions, academic institutions all over the world. The RFP process is open to researchers everywhere. How we partner with industry is typically we help them find the right key opinion leaders, as Tim said, as scientific Cupid, where we can partner with them. So, if they're working on a particularly complicated piece of their project, we're more likely to pull together the right top experts and bring them in to help boost the advice that they need to get over that hurdle, to get over the hump so that they can keep moving forward. We do have some experience with venture philanthropy. That's a model that's maybe 10, 15 years old in the nonprofit sector, where you approach that with investing donor dollars to get a return on your investment, which goes right back into your mission. And so we do have some of that partnership with biotechnologies, but it's a much smaller scale. So typically we're really there to be a sounding board, guidance, advice, so that they can keep moving forward.
So you mentioned one example where something that's being funded. Is there one or two others that you want to discuss that fit into the strategic plan and how they'll help patients? I know in previous episodes, particularly episode number 1 that we did with Laura. And by the way, if you haven't listened to those 2 episodes, go up to our YouTube channel, Love Hope Lyme, just search either GLA or Laura MacNeill, and you'll be able to hear what Laura had to say on previous shows. But is there another example or two of a funded research project that you want to bring up?
Yeah, there's actually a project that we've been funding back since 2021. The researcher is Dr. Brandon Jutras. He was at Virginia Tech University, and he's now at Northwestern University. And he is developing a very innovative diagnostic test for Lyme disease, a direct diagnostic test. And so if I can use the analogy of a brick wall, a brick wall is made up of bricks. What holds the bricks together? The mortar in between the bricks. So Dr. Jutras has identified a specific structural protein that essentially holds the Lyme bacteria together. It's like the bricks that are held together by the mortar, okay? And so he can actually detect that mortar, that Lyme bacterial protein in blood, in urine. You don't have to wait for the patient's immune system to develop antibodies. And he discovered that this bacterial protein is very inflammatory. It causes inflamed joints, inflamed heart, inflammation in the brain. And so not only is he focused on this bacterial protein as a direct diagnostic test, he's also developing strategies to remove this protein from chronic Lyme patients to actually eliminate the inflammatory trigger that is causing their persistent symptoms. So very, very exciting work.
I want to punctuate that too, because Tim heard a presentation from Dr. Dutress at a conference, and this is where GLA really becomes the glue, because GLA is positioned to go out and look across the whole space for some of this innovative work that might not get funding by anybody else. So GLA came in early to fund that because it had such promise. And once Dr. Dutress started proving his concept and showing these amazing results, he just in the last year and a half, Tim, he's received a couple of $1 million in grants, and it's all starting to really move into a very promising, potentially commercialized diagnostic test. And that's the beginning of that translational research, start proving concept. And that's where GLA really is the bread and butter. What is out there that is otherwise going to be ignored or buried because it's not getting enough pop? And how can we start to just build up its proof of concept so that it gets attention? And Dr. Dutrich's work is a perfect example.
Yeah, and that's yet another hat that I wear. In addition to a CSO and scientific Cupid, I'm also a talent scout. So I love analogies. If you think about someone that shows up at the local high school, football field or baseball field, and they're looking for that young diamond in the rough, that's what I can do because of my 20 plus years experience as a research scientist in the field. And so I have a sense of, wow, that's really exciting, really cutting edge. It's a very novel, outside the box idea, so it's not getting funded by the NIH or the CDC or the Department of Defense. Let's come in with some seed funding and let that researcher discover, is there any there? And if there is, as Laura said, then the other larger funding agencies come in. So we play a critical leadership role in the field that way as well.
That's a great explanation. Tim, I'm just kind of curious. Again, we've had Laura on the show in the past, and she's given us a little bit about her background, what got her to GLA, what got you to GLA, and you can discuss whatever you want to discuss. But curiously, how has your career taken you to this moment where you're leading all this energy to create Lyme research and opportunities like you discussed?
Right. So, as I mentioned, I spent 20 plus years as an academic research scientist at academic institutions, at nonprofit research institutes. I finished up as the chair of the Department of Infectious Diseases at Southern Research in Birmingham, Alabama, with a joint faculty appointment at the University of Alabama, Birmingham, in the Department of Microbiology. And I got to a point in my career where I wanted to make a more significant impact on the field than I could running my own independent research program. And so I had this opportunity to submit my application to GLA to serve as their chief scientific officer. And I saw this as an opportunity to really impact the entire field by working with my colleagues and developing an internal research program to fund some of the most cutting edge research that I was painfully aware myself was not going to get funded by the NIH until it was a little further along, a little more developed. And so that's the role that I've helped, or the gap that I've helped GLA fill.
So I'm kind of curious here. So besides the black-legged deer tick and Lyme disease, what other ticks and tick-borne diseases are on the rise? And I'm also kind of curious what GLA might be doing about those.
Right. So yes, so in addition to the black-legged, the deer tick, which is very endemic, very high numbers in the Northeast, there is the Lone Star tick, Amblyomma americanum, a true patriot, traveling all across the country from Texas. It's got a little white spot on its back, which is kind of looks like a star. That's why it's called the Lone Star tick. And the Lone Star tick is actually more aggressive than the northeastern deer tick. It's actually overtaking the deer tick in terms of just sheer numbers of organisms. It causes different diseases than the deer tick does. And one that you may have heard about is red meat allergy. So if you are bitten by a Lone Star tick, you can develop a very severe allergy to red meat because your immune system is recognizing a protein in the saliva of the tick. And when the tick bites you and takes a blood meal, it's kind of gross, but it actually spits into, into the skin. It's kind of like regurgitates. And your immune system says, "Oh my God, that's a foreign protein. We need to attack it." But the problem is, it also winds up generating an allergic response to your own body's proteins. And so, with successive exposure to red meat, you can get a more and more severe allergic reaction. So, you're probably aware of a peanut allergy or a bee sting allergy. This is kind of similar, except the peanut allergy or the bee sting allergy, that literally within seconds or minutes of coming in contact with that allergen, you have a very severe reaction. So the red meat allergy, thankfully, is not that rapid, but it can get more and more severe with repeated exposures, and it can cause death. It can cause this anaphylactic shock that you may have heard of associated with peanut allergies.
Mhm.
Swollen tongue, swollen
Yeah.
throat.
And what is
Yeah.
that called? What is the disease called?
It's called red meat allergy.
Or alpha gal. You might have heard
Alpha
of
gal,
alpha
yes.
gal.
Yes,
Yeah.
And
alpha
that
gal.
this is, you're going along your life and you never had trouble with red meat, right? So you imagine you're just going through your summer. And then at each barbecue, you're feeling just worse and worse. I mean, truly, and people listening to this podcast might say, well, I would think about alpha gal, but the majority of the community is not going to think about it. They're going to have no idea why they're suddenly not
Yes.
well. They're probably not
Yes.
even going to tie it back to the red meat. And so this is a subtle, potentially life-threatening repercussion to a tick bite that you might not even have known you got. You never even
That's
knew it
just,
came and went.
yeah, I was actually at a diner recently, and I was talking to someone. I had my book out, so I was talking about both of my books, Love, Hope, Lyme, and the waiter came over and said, "Oh, my brother has alpha gal, actually brother-in-law." And for 20 minutes, he talked about the anaphylactic shock and the allergy and all the things and how he's got to be careful because, like you just said, Laura, it can you may eat the wrong thing and then it leads to something like that. I was shocked that, again, it was a diner in Virginia, just out of the blue, seeing the title of the book, and they were able to tie it there together. Well, listen, today we talked on the Love Hope Lyme podcast. We talked with Laura MacNeill, the CEO of the Global Lyme Alliance, and Tim Sellati, the Chief Scientific Officer. Every quarter, we bring on Laura to talk about what GLA is doing, where research is going, what the priorities are. And I want to thank you both for always contributing great information and always adding just so much value to what's going on out there. And it's just critical stuff to support a community. I like to say a community that's always in search of peace with these diseases that do things that a lot of people don't understand, that look like something else, that there's not great testing for, which you communicated. And what's going into the 3-year plan is just remarkable. And we've already seen, the community's already seen so much benefit and good stuff that's coming. I'm just kind of curious. If you could pick one major question to answer in the next 5 years, what would it be? Tim, why don't you go first? And then Laura, I'd like you to kind of bring us home. Oh, unless Laura, if you want to go first, that's fine.
No. I'm curious what Tim's going to say.
Actually, Laura touched on it right at the very beginning. One of the greatest challenges right now is it is ridiculously difficult to distinguish between a patient suffering from chronic Lyme disease, long COVID, chronic fatigue syndrome, chronic EBV, Epstein-Barr virus infection, multiple sclerosis. And so if I had, one wish, it would be actually two wishes. One is to figure out how to differentially diagnose these different chronic illnesses that hundreds of thousands of people suffer from now. Okay. And the second half of that wish is either researchers in the Lyme field or the COVID field or the multiple sclerosis field figure out how to help truly improve patients' lives, their quality of life. And I don't care if the answer comes from the MS field, if that helps, or the COVID field, if that helps chronic Lyme patients, fantastic. If GLA is the one to discover how to positively impact chronic Lyme patients' lives, and it helps with patients suffering from chronic fatigue syndrome, all the better. Bigger scientific bang for your donor's dollar.
All right, great. Laura, why don't you bring us home?
I echo everything Tim just said, but I'll add on by also saying, and it sort of is part of that, the Lyme disease reaction from folks that are exposed to the bacteria, and I'll say Lyme, but co-infections included, is a whole spectrum. And one of our researchers said this at our research symposium. It's a full spectrum. Some people it's, wow, I just felt kind of tired and my knees were swollen. I took antibiotics for 2 weeks, no big deal, whatever, it's over. And for others, it's a severe life-changing, a whole new baseline of health event. And we're seeing that in COVID, and we're seeing that with some of the other diseases that Tim said. And I would love to understand what differentiates me from you, from Tim, right? In that the three of us could be exposed to the exact same bacteria and have a completely different response. And I think if in 5 years, which maybe COVID can take a big jump at this, because we see the same spectrum of response with COVID, right? Some people don't have any symptoms. And then you have others that are severely debilitated with POTS or, chronic fatigue and just headaches. They just they're not recovering. If we can unlock genetically why that's different, it's going to open up the answers for all of those diseases, plus many more. And so there's work being done there. There is energy being put around what is the difference between individuals who have this broad spectrum of reaction. And we can understand genetically what's different between each of those patients. We can really start to break down what's happening with a chronically ill Lyme patient and start working towards a treatment for them.
Yeah, we're actually funding research at Tufts University precisely on those two topics. Fred, I could talk to you for another several hours to tell you about research that we're funding.
Well, once again, we're as part of the Love Hope Lyme podcast, we're bringing Laura MacNeill back every quarter. So, if Laura wants to bring you back on the next show, that's great. And the topics, every topic, everything that you guys are working on, I've spoken to hundreds, if not thousands of people who are struggling with. And, I had a friend who reached out to me recently, a friend from college who has been following my Lyme book and podcast journey, who said he just got alpha-gal.
Yeah.
He said he was bitten by a Lone Star. This is on Long Island.
Oh, yeah.
This is out on the
Oh,
Hamptons. Yeah. And I've spoken to people, as you know, Laura, who have gotten bitten by the black-legged ear tick in Central Park.
Oh, that's the whole point. Listen, if there's a small mammal that breathes CO2, there's a potential for a tick there. But that's our point, in that it's traveling all over. And so, I mean,
Yes.
I was living in Massachusetts. If I pack a suitcase and I take all of my clothes and I go to California and I stay in a hotel room and I brought a little guy with me and you come into that hotel room, you can get bit by that tick there. I mean, you really just have to be aware all the time about what a potential symptom could be for a tick-borne illness, and just be always thinking about it. I mean, that's just like, if you could ask, could this be a tick-borne infection? You're already on the right path.
Yeah, just last thing is I was taking a hike in Philadelphia recently, one of the trails in what's called Pennypack Park, and there was a sign.
Pennypack Park?
Yeah, there was a sign in the middle of the trail that said tick infested area, be careful, etc. And I took a picture and I posted it, and hundreds of people commented. You just, like, we sometimes say, the best prevention is prevention.
Yeah.
All right. Once again, I want to thank Laura MacNeill, the CEO of Global Lyme Alliance, Tim Sellati. It was great having you, the Chief Scientific Officer, on today's show. My name is Fred Diamond. This is the Love Hope Lyme podcast.